Welcome to the Australian Property Investment Podcast with your host, Aaron-Christie David. Each episode, we ask an expert to share their key insights for aspiring investors to make confident property choices.
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast, all about helping you make better property choices. My name is Aaron-Christie David, founder of Atelier Wealth, a mortgage broking business specializing in helping property investors. Each week, we invite a special guest on who tend to be a thought leader, a heavy hitter in their industry. And this week, we're privileged to have Ben Nash grace us with his presence, mate. Ben, thank you very much and welcome.
G'day. Hi all.
Ben, you are a gun financial planner. I say that because we've met a number of financial planners, and you are incredible at what you do. You're the founder of Pivot Wealth, the author of Get Unstuck as well, mate, which is incredible. And you specialize in working with clients in their 30s and 40s, really kind of helping them be smarter with their money as well. So just want to head over to yourself and say, Ben, what's kind of inspired you? A couple of things, your own journey with starting Pivot Wealth as well, and inspired the book, mate, if you can share that with us.
So good to be here, and thanks for having me. I suppose, bit of a weird sort of journey. When I finished high school, I never really knew what I wanted to do. I thought about going to university, but I had some mates that they went there and then they sort of dropped out and wasted a bunch of time. And I thought, well, that's I don't want to do that. And I also had a friend that was actually a bricklayer, and he said, come work with me for a bit. And I thought, oh, yeah, righto. So went off and started making pretty good money for like 17-and-a-half-year-old off the back end of high school. And I did that for a while. But a couple of years later, I sort of started thinking to myself, well, I probably don't want to do this forever. It was super fun when I was young and, work in the sun and get strong, like throwing bricks around.
Yeah. But nice tan.
Get a bit of a tan. But yeah, I figured I didn't want to do it forever. So I was thinking about what to do, and just fortuitously, my grandma actually gave me this book about money book called Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. A few of the listeners probably know who he is. He's pretty sort of prolific out there. And yeah, randomly, and then it just sort of struck a chord with me how he sort of demystified some concepts that I'd previously found quite confusing. I suppose everyone wants money, most people at least. I thought it really sparked an interest. I was always a fair bit of a reader, so I just started buying more and more books and reading more and more about personal finance. And I thought, yeah, this is sort of for me. Decided to go back to university and study commerce, so I did that at that time, and yeah, I sort of really, really enjoyed it. Never really looked back from there. When I got into uni, I started thinking that it caught up in that hype around investment banking. Students going, oh, you want to be a high flyer, and they take you these days and you see the guys in their nice suits and all that sort of stuff. But I always had, when I went, I wanted to do investment advice and financial planning. Yeah. And then when it came time to apply for grad jobs, I didn't really have any connections or anything in the industry or any experience. So I just started applying out, and half of them were banking and half of them were in financial planning. And it was a difficult time because you're trying to keep your grades up so that you get good marks so that you can get a good job.
Yeah.
But then they're doing all these psychometric tests and it's taking hours, and it was a huge pain. So I had a sort of an okay resume, so I was getting through a few of the stages, and it was taking all this time. And eventually I got offered a job at don't even know if I should say, a company called Dixon Advisory. Right. And I was happy that I just thought I'll use that job as a stepping stone and get some experience, and then sort of take that next step.
Yeah.
Look, I when I went into the job, the work was really appealing, and working with different people every day, and it was interesting. It was a bit of a weird one from a financial planning business that they separated. Now the reasons are probably coming a bit more apparent, but they separated the investment advice from the financial advice. And I was in the financial advice team doing all the technical advice, helping people that were sort of getting to the back end of their careers, getting set up for retirement, that they were doing a lot of self-managed super fund business, obviously, but we were doing all the technical strategy advice around setting up for retirement, all that sort of stuff. And I like my mum was a teacher, so I don't know how much of that she sort of passed down to me, but I feel like a lot of, mortgage broking, financial planning, a lot of property advice, buyers advocacy advice, that sort of stuff. It's a lot of education for people, and everyone's very confused because it's fairly complicated, right? And a lot of people don't have that necessarily that sort of background. So, I love the work and got into it. I was lucky at that time that there was a lot of room for progression quite quickly. And it wasn't too long before I started sort of taking on clients myself and, getting that exposure. And I worked there for about 3 years. And then they actually restructured their entire business, sacked all of their financial advisors. It was
the highs and lows of corporate life, mate.
I know, right? So, it was at the time I thought it was bad, but it was the best thing that ever happened because I left there and went to work for a small business where I started working with a lot of younger people, and the younger people that were setting up, I joined this business that was a mortgage broker and a lawyer, and they were helping people buy their first homes and really set up their futures, I suppose. And they brought me in to start a financial planning offer for the business. So how to help these people on the financial planning side of things, with their other peripheral areas outside of property. And it was really fun. I really loved the work. It was good starting to sort of create something and come up with an offer and asking people, what's important to you? What are the problems? What can we do to help? And then I started, I met I was working in the industry with a number of other financial planners, and we were sort of sharing a bit around what we were doing. And a mate by the name of Andrew Shakespeare, he's a planner up in out of Newcastle. He was showing me a lot of the financial modelling that they were doing. So he was doing a lot of work with younger people as well, but helping them understand. We use financial planning software to look at what someone's asset position, what's their income, where are they spending their money, and what's left over, and then what can we do with that, whether it's buy property or buy shares or contribute to super or whatever the things are. And so I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like, I'm building these models. It was really fun to see like how someone's future could sort of play out. And I'm showing these people and going like, if you do this, then this is what it looks like. And I wouldn't say we're always been pretty conservative. We want to make sure that we've got a solid dose of reality with what we do. But people weren't getting rich quick, but in not too long a time, we could see that they were, going to fairly substantially build their savings and investments and assets. So, they were excited. I was excited. And I'd sort of give them a track to run on and send them on their way. And then people would come back, 6 months later or 12 months later. And at the start, I actually talk about this in my book, that I was all excited. I was like, great, we're going to have this property will be there, and the savings balance will be there, and the investments will be there. And then we're going to be able to do this other thing and blah, blah, blah. And people would come in, but then nobody was on track. They weren't even close. Like this thing had come up, and, little Jimmy needed braces, and this other thing happened, and so at the first couple I was like, oh, okay, well, Jimmy needs braces, of course, and you need that pizza oven or whatever. But after a while I was thinking, well, hold on, something's gone wrong, because it's happening to everyone. And I was saying to people, like, what's going on? Like, what's stopping you from doing this? Because you can see that you can do it, you want to do it, you know what to do, but you're not doing it. So what's the issue? And the feedback that I got was that it was just too hard, no system. So that's where I started, started getting really heavy into people's banking and helping them structure their bank accounts in a way to make it easy for them to save and make it easy for them to manage their money. And started getting some good results from there. It was quite a process, and it was a 5-year journey across multiple businesses. I left that company sort of 3 years after I started, and started Pivot Wealth back in 2015. And but it's been a progression since there, and now we've got that banking system that makes it easier for people. But importantly, for things like property, it makes it really easy to plan and understand the numbers and that sort of stuff. So. I think I'm sure why not.
Absolutely. One of the big questions I've got, and what a lot of clients will ask us is property or shares. And they tend to think that they have to do one or the other. I think there's a possibility to do both and do them well. In your experience, when someone asks you, I'm at the crossroads, do I go property or shares? What's your, and obviously it's unique to everyone. What's kind of your, what's your,
ask from someone with a magnificent beard, etc.
Correct.
Yeah, look, I think they both definitely have their place. I think sometimes people can run into problems by rushing to buy property when it's not the right time for them and end up too stretched and end up running into trouble. Property shares can be a good way it's a fairly flexible way to build assets when people living overseas. There are some tax advantages of doing that. Sometimes you can do both at the same time. So like debt recycling strategies and, paying down non-tax deductible debt and building up tax deductible debt and buying shares while you pay down your mortgage can be a really good strategy.
Yep.
As well. But I think that property tends to sort of trump shares in a lot of cases because of the gearing benefits. It's not like someone saves up $100,000 in a savings account and you can choose to either use $100,000 to buy $100,000 worth of shares, or you can use $100,000 to buy an $800,000 property and pay your deposit. And then you've got, as long as you choose a good property, you've got this significantly bigger asset, often 10 times the size or something like that, that's working for you. So a $100,000 share portfolio in a lot of cases can't compete with, in almost every case, can't compete with an $800,000 property. So yeah, that's where I think that the property has the advantage. The numbers do say when you add up the rental income and the growth that we've seen in Australian residential property over the last sort of 20 to 100 years, the numbers are slightly higher as well, although it's not an enormous difference, but it's really that gearing benefit that I think has the advantage.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. Another big question is structure. And where I'm going with this is, do we buy in our individual names and name an investment property? Do we buy this property in our individual names? Do we buy it through a company structure? Do we buy it through a trust structure? Do we buy it through a self-managed super fund, for example? Every vehicle has different benefits and unique to everyone as well. But talk us through at what point do you start talking about here's the right structure to maybe buy that next property through, and then what would you suggest as well?
Yeah, look, I think it's really the answer to that question lies in what the bigger picture strategy is. I think people can fall into the trap of making decisions in isolation and look at, is this investment a good investment? Is this property a good property? Should I buy this dead structure? I think it's hard for onesie-twosies on property to know that one structure has the advantage. But if you think about what you want to do bigger picture over over the medium to long term, then that can start to drive the options around the strategy as well. They all have their advantages, like buying inside structures, there are land tax issues. Buying in companies, you miss the capital gains tax concession over time. But buying property, we tend to favour a sort of a buy and hold approach with property. Property's expensive to buy and sell, the taxes are high. So if you can set up your property strategy so that you're just building equity, building assets over time, that's something you can leverage as well. So if you're doing that, then that can mean that some options are more or less favourable or more favourable when it comes to structures. But look, I think that really if you're going to buy a lot of properties, like, four or more, then looking closely at structures there's some merit in doing that. If you've got a lot of money, then there is also merit in doing that. I know you and I have worked together and a few people in the technology space in Sydney and people with startup companies, and they make, significant money. And then structures, I think, can be a good way where, if you know that your taxable income's always going to be more than $180,000 a year, then there are some pretty substantial advantages in structuring things. If you've got a partner that's planning time out of the workforce for children, for example, or even if you're using corporate beneficiaries or parents who are getting close to retirement.
Yeah.
There are ways that you can save, tens of thousands of dollars in tax by using structures. I don't think there's a blanket approach. I think that it's wrong. I think a lot of, media organizations and different places, they're always looking for the rule that everyone should do this, or most people in this situation should do this.
It gets eyeballs, it gets attention, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so, I don't think that's the case. I think the right decision for any person depends on them, where they're at now, how they see their situation changing over time, and what's important to them as well. So there's definitely benefit there, but no one-size-fits-all approach. I think, in my very biased view, I think it can sometimes be hard speaking to accountants about structures because they clearly have a vested interest in you using structures. So although that being said, my own accountant, he is against using trusts for property, but some people, I think, they can sometimes have a vested interest in you doing it, and you think about the strategy and it just doesn't make sense. So looking at the numbers and, what are the benefits, it can be quite complicated. So
complicated, conflicting. I mean, I always go back to this analogy that you ask a mortgage broker, you ask a financial planner, an accountant, a buyer's agent, friends, family, parents, listen to the media. You will get 10 sets of conflicting advice about how to buy that one investment property. And you can understand that complexity becomes the enemy. People don't take any action because they're so overwhelmed with that much information. Their own mortgage broker, their own financial planner, their own accountant can't seem to agree. What does that do to a client's mindset, right? And how to buy that next property as well.
Yeah. All this information is out there these days. It's all just a keystroke or 10 away on the internet. But it's like everyone's drinking from the fire hose. And the more opinions you get, the more options you consider, the less likely you are to make a decision. There's a lot of research out there that shows that. So I think you got to choose the people that you ask wisely. Yeah. Don't ask people that haven't done it before. Absolutely. Like, we see people that talk, and for a lot of younger people,
the financial planning, either advice from Facebook or maybe parents, for example, right?
People around the water cooler that have never done it before, or parents even that have grown up in a completely different generation that have completely different objectives, and a lot of young professionals these days, their incomes are significantly higher than their parents' incomes will ever be, and they're going to be much more financially well off. So there's no point. Well, it can create issues when you're asking folks for what they should do when they're, it's a different time. It's a different world, essentially. Yeah.
Thanks very much. And just on that point about choices, I know you really have a soft spot for kind of how do you cut through the noise and then work with clients to make good choices. So can you just kind of elaborate on that for us, Manica? Your approach, somewhat unique. You don't think it is, but I think it's
I don't think it should be unique, but I think you're right that it is to a degree. But really, I think that strategy should come first for property. Property is an emotional decision. Yeah. It's almost impossible to buy a property, whether it's your own home or an investment, especially if it's an investment, without having some sort of emotional attachment. You're wondering, would you live in this property? Who are the tenants that would live in this property? What is it going to do over time? Or if you're buying as your own home, even worse, like how's it going to feel? What color will I paint the feature wall? Yeah. All of the things. So people they start to think through these things first, and then they get set down with a particular course of action, and then they try to wrap a strategy around the thing that they think is okay. Whereas we try to take a more objective approach where first look at, well, why are we actually doing this? And I had this conversation like most days I said to a client yesterday, she said, I said, what does success look like? Like in 3 years for you to be blown away with where you're at and what's going on. What is it? What's important to you? What is it that you want to see? I said, we want to be living in our own home, be setting up for a family. And then and then she kept going. And after she'd finished, I said, we spoke a little bit more. And then I said, why is that important to you when you say your own home? She said, well, that's just, I don't know. I feel like it's security. And I say, well, okay, but is it security, or if there was another decision that made good financial sense, that made better financial sense, would you do that? And in the end, she said, well, yeah, actually, it's not the important thing. It's just that it's sort of ingrained in us. And I think, again, going back to that generational thing that our parents say, buy the property, you can touch it. Like, yeah, everyone knows what a property is. Share market's scary.
Yeah.
Super funds don't trust them.
Yeah.
But you should just buy a property, which, look, as I've already said that I think property is a very good investment. So there's not to take away from that, but it's not the only investment, and buying your own home is not the only course of action, and often not always the best course of action. I've seen people that have overextended themselves way too far end up in a bunch of trouble as a result of trying to get what they see in their mind as the ideal property. So when we focus on it, we try to take the emotion out of it. Start with the numbers. Look at what makes sense. How much should you spend? How much should you borrow? How should you structure your purchase? Is an investment or your own home? What's the difference between those two options? And then how does that feel to you as well? Because while the emotion's not the most important thing, it is important. So we try to find a strategy where you're getting a good balance between the financial benefits and the emotional peace of mind, confidence levels, stress levels. And then you can go, once you've got your strategy set, you can ruthlessly execute on your strategy.
Having someone like yourself keep them accountable as well, regular check-ins.
Making sure that it works, because a plan's great, but the process of planning is valuable to entice out what you want. But when you're planning, you know the least about what's actually going to happen. So it's good to be there. We find it a lot with, we've worked together with a number of clients and they think, I'm going to spend this much, and then they end up like, I found a bargain, I can get something a bit cheaper, or I really need to push up a bit because I can't get there. Does that still fit? Is it still appropriate? It's not going to throw us out with all the other things that we want to do. So I think that knowing that you've got, your as a strategy evolves, that it's consistent with what you want to be doing long term.
Really great message, mate. Really clear in what you're saying. So, mate, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge, your insights, your tips. Mate, it's incredible what you've been doing at Pivot Wealth, mate. So well done. Keep it up. That's been a wrap for this week. Thank you very much for listening. As we always say, our discussion is of a general nature. We do not know your financial situation. So if you do want financial advice, feel free to reach out to Ben. His details will be in the show notes below. Also, if you found this episode helpful, please feel free to leave us a review, give us some feedback as well, or share with your friends and family. Thanks very much. Until next time, have a great week.